welcome up Larry.
Woo woo!
Fast Larry?
I thought this was Larry. Oh. All right, you're on.
My name is Larry. Yeah, I graduated from Cornell in 2012, which is right now, but in May. And I joined crew right afterwards. If you guys don't know, maybe this is a fun fact for you all, Epic is part of crew. Epic is they serve the Asian Americans. I want to show this clip, and maybe you guys have seen this, but if you haven't, then enjoy. There's no violence or anything. It's just lights. So if you don't like violence, you don't need to worry about this.
Hopefully I'll be able to get. There you go.
Oh.
No violence.
Are you sure there's no violence?
It's the Matrix, so.
Not in this clip.
I don't remember that before the sound.
That's not the.
Yes. It's an honor to meet you. No. The honor is mine. Please, come. Sit. I imagine that right now you're feeling a bit like Alice. Tumbling down the rabbit hole. You can say that. I can see it in your eyes. You have the look of a man who accepts what he sees because he is expecting to wake up. Ironically, this is not far from the truth. Do you believe in fate, Neil?
No.
Why not?
Because I don't like the idea that I'm not in control of my life.
I know exactly what you mean. Let me tell you why you're here. You're here because you know something. What you know you can't explain, but you feel it. You felt it your entire life. That there's something wrong with the world. You don't know what it is, but it's there. Like a splinter in your mind, driving you mad. It is this feeling that has brought you to me. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Matrix.
Do you want to know what it is? The Matrix is everywhere. It is all around us. Even now, in this very room, you can see it when you look out your window, or when you turn on your television. You can feel it when you go to work, when you go to church, when you pay your taxes. It is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth.
What truth?
That you are a slave, Neo. Like everyone else, you were born into bondage, born into a prison that you cannot smell or taste or touch. A prison for your mind. Unfortunately, no one can be told what the Matrix is. You have to see it for yourself. This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. Remember, all I'm offering is the truth, nothing.
you guys seen this before?
Yes.
You never seen this before? Wait.
Movie night right now.
We're watching it right now.
Yeah, maybe one of these days we'll watch this. But wait, who's watched this before? Okay, so most of you. Good. So this is one of those. If you haven't watched this before, right? This is one of those movies from which, like, I heard about it in middle school and I've heard people talking about it, but I never really got around to watching it until a few years later. But it was hyped up for me quite a bit, and it definitely. For most movies, when it's hyped up that much, it doesn't live up to it. But this one actually did. So if you aren't familiar with the story, the basic storyline is there was a series of battles between humans and machines, right? Humans created these machines, they discovered artificial intelligence, right? So they had these battles, and eventually the machines won. And what they did was they took the humans and they put them in these pods, right? And they used them as energy, right? And they had these things plugged into them, use them as energy. And that's how the machines survived, right? And to keep the humans tame, what they did was they inserted they inserted their brains, not their brains, they inserted their consciences into this computer program. It was this elaborate computer program. And in this computer program, that's just where they lived. And that's what they thought was regular life. And so these humans, they were deceived into thinking they were living these ordinary lives, where they went to school, went to work, and went to church, and paid taxes, whatever, right? But the reality was, this was just essentially a dream, a really long dream, right? The reality was that they were actually plugged into this computer program, and they were actually, like, the bodies were just being, feeded on by these machines for energy. And so that's the story. That's the basic backdrop, right? And Neo was one of these guys who grew up in this matrix. So this computer program is called the Matrix, right? That's the elaborate system. So Neo's one of these guys who grew up in the Matrix, and he started to see weird things going on, and he started to get curious. Maybe there's something out there, right? And then Morpheus, who's this guy he was talking to, actually got in touch with him, and this is their first encounter, and Morpheus is here telling him, there's actually something out there. You're actually onto something, and let me show you what that is. And so he offered him this red pill, blue pill thing, and from then on, he actually gave Neo a way out of the system. So he got out of the computer program, he was able to see the world for what it is, and he was recruited then to this team that they had formed called Resistance. And the Resistance essentially was a group of people who broke free from the Matrix somehow, and their mission essentially was to rescue other human beings from this Matrix system, right? So does that make sense? That's basic background, right? So I loved it, and there's more details, but that's basically what's going on, right? And so actually, it's interesting because it wasn't until I watched this a few times. Actually, I bought this DVD a few weeks ago at Baltimore at a yard sale for $1. And actually, it was the first time I watched it in a long time, and I realized there were actually really interesting parallelisms, really interesting connections between this and Christianity, right? Because in reality, this isn't far from the truth, right? There is, I guess you can say, what most people think is real, right? And they live life accordingly. They go to school, and they go to work, and they make money, and they make relationships, and get married, and have families. That's what people do, right? But the Bible claims that there is a deeper reality, right? And this deeper reality is calling out to every one of us. Like in the same way it called out to Neo, right? And it's inviting us to consciously take part in it. And this deeper reality is essentially why EpicMovement exists. And that deeper reality is why we're here today. And that's what I'll be talking a little bit about today. So I have a PowerPoint slide. We're going to read through this passage. This is John 8. I use the matrix colors to keep the scheme. This is John 8. Right here, Jesus. So John, if you don't know, it's a record of the life of Jesus, right? There are several records of him, and John's one of them. And here you have Jesus talking with some Jews, right? And so I'm just going to read it to you guys. So Jesus said to the Jews who had believed him, "If you abide in my word, you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." They answered him, "We are offspring of Abraham and have never been enslaved to anyone. How is it that you say you will become free?" We can go to the next slide. Jesus answered them, "Truly, truly, I say to you, everyone who practices sin is a slave to sin. The slave does not remain in the house forever, the Son remains forever. So if the Son sets you free, you'll be free indeed." Right, so you have Jesus and the Jews, and he's saying, if you follow me, if you listen to me, you will know the truth, right? And the truth will set you free. And then these Jews, they don't get it. They go, set free. Like, we're not enslaved to anybody. And Jesus is saying, actually, anybody who commits a sin is a slave to sin, right? And then he goes on and talks about how the Son can set you free. And so I'm imagining Neo might have felt a little bit like this in that scene that we just watched, right? When Morpheus told him that he was a slave. And that, like, Neo was like, Morpheus said that the Matrix was the thing to keep you from knowing the truth. And Neo was like, what truth? And Morpheus said that you were a slave, right? You're a slave. Your mind is in a prison, right? It's the same idea, right? Jesus says, and essentially Jesus is saying that there's this deeper reality that these Jews don't realize, and that is that they were enslaved to sin. Just as Neo, in a sense, was enslaved and he didn't realize it. So let's rewind a little bit. I was talking a little about sin. Do you guys remember? We talked about sin last week. You guys are here. Do you guys remember how Tony defined it last week? Do you guys remember?
Anything that doesn't take us towards God.
Yeah, that's definitely actually in the Bible there are multiple definitions of sin. And there's multiple characteristics. So yeah, that's definitely actually we can throw some more ideas around. So it's something that doesn't take us toward God. What else? Do you remember the analogy he used? There was
using an iPhone as a hammer.
Yeah, using an iPhone as a hammer. Nice. Not fulfilling our intended purpose, right? That's the idea, right? Why were iPhones made? They're made to be so you could call people and play Words with Friends, right? Right? That's essentially why iPhones are made. You don't use them as hammers, right? And it's the same concept. Like Christians believe that God designed human beings in a certain way to fulfill a certain purpose, right? And when humans don't fulfill that purpose, that's sin, right? So a lot of times people think of sin as just following regulations or whatever, and that's true to some extent, but it's deeper. It's more than that, right? And here's an interesting passage from Jeremiah 2. This is God talking, and he's saying, "For my people have committed two evils. They have forsaken me, the fountain of living waters, and hewed out cisterns for themselves, broken cisterns that can hold no water." If you don't know what a cistern is, it's kind of like a well, basically. It's not really a well, but it's basically a well, right? So he's saying, God is describing himself as a fountain of living waters. In other words, he's our ultimate source of life, right? And not just life. It's satisfaction, it's security, it's identity, it's all those things. And evil in his mind, or sin in his mind, is rejecting that source and finding those things elsewhere, right? And it can be anything. It can be sex or alcohol or drugs, or it can be quote-unquote good things, like jobs or human relationships or sports or hobbies or friends or families, right? It's when we find our ultimate source of life in these things, God calls that an evil, right? And the reason why it is in a sense evil, I think, is because it's so self-destructive, right? There's this passage in the Bible, I don't have it up, but it says that God has put eternity in man's hearts, right? In other words, like in Christianity, there's this belief that all of nature is finite, but human beings actually last forever.
The other room.
Oh, all right. Feel free to say though. Right? It's this idea that everything is finite, but humans were meant to last forever. And so, how can we be fully satisfied by finite things if we were infinite beings, right? So that's the idea, right? All these things that we go to for life and satisfaction or whatever, that ultimately will let us down, right? They might work a little bit for a little while, but it'll come to a head eventually, and it won't satisfy anymore. And so it's kind of like running a car on popcorn, something like that. It might work for a little bit, but it'll break down. Or you might find something better. You might use vegetable oil. It might run for a little longer, but eventually it will break down. Because because the car wasn't designed for that. You know what I mean? And that's why when you buy a car, you also get a car manual. I bought a car a few weeks ago. I didn't get a manual, but I was supposed to pick it up sometime. But you're supposed to get a manual. And why do you have a manual? So you know what the car, how the car functions. You know what you can do with the car. And for Christians, we believe the same thing. That when God designed human beings, He gave us the manual, and we call that the Bible. But it's the same kind of concept. That God has given us certain things, and certain regulations, and certain wirings, and He's laid that out in the Bible for us. And that's how we know how we're designed, and how we operate, whatever, right? And so oftentimes people go, they talk about, how they don't like how God doesn't hate sin or whatever, but like the core, the main reason why God doesn't hate sin is because He loves us, right? The reason why God hates sin so much is because sin destroys those God loves. You know what I mean? God sees us, and He sees us not living up to our potential, not living up to our purpose, and instead we're being used essentially like batteries, like in the Matrix, where these people, they're human beings, but they're not being human beings. Their main function is to provide energy for machines. And that's not the purpose, the intention of a human being, right? And so God sees that, and His heart breaks for us, right? He longs for us to return to our purpose, right? So that's a little bit of a tangent, but that's sin. So Jesus here in this passage in John 8, He shows us another characteristic of sin, right? And He says, anyone who commits a sin is a slave to sin, right? In other words, it's addictive, right? It's controlling. Once you taste it, it's impossible to get out of it. Once you start finding fulfillment in things like your grades or in Jeremy Lin or whatever, right? Once you start finding fulfillment in that, it's really hard to get out. There's no turning back in a sense, right? And then if the Knicks do well, what's the team?
Rockets.
The Rockets. Or if you're like the Wizards, I don't know what you like. But like if whatever team does well, maybe just talk about football. It's football season. If whatever team does well, you feel a little better. And if they tank or something, some of your identity goes down. And that's sports, right? And it might be the same thing with grades, or it might be the same thing with friendships, or whatever. Whenever our emotional stability, in a sense, whenever emotional stability is dependent on something that's outside of God, you always run a risk of crashing, right? Because nothing is 100% reliable. And that's why God wants us to be hooked onto Him, in a sense, right? And so, the Bible says that though we were created to know God, to love God, to worship God, to enjoy God, that's our main purpose, we have 100% abandoned that. We have chosen, instead, to be slaves to sin. You know what scares me the most about this passage that we read earlier in John 8? Is the response of these Jews, right? They don't even see a need for freedom because they have not yet recognized their slavery, right? They're ignorant of their slavery. And the more we read the Bible, we discover that it's not just them. Actually, the Bible talks of everybody, right? Here's Romans 3, 10 to 12. This is Paul, the Apostle Paul writing. He says, none is righteous, no, not one. No one understands, no one seeks for God. All have turned aside, together they have become worthless, no one does good, not even one. All right, here's Paul writing again. For to set the mind on the flesh is death. Actually, I'll skip this. Actually, no, I won't skip this. For the mind that is set on the flesh is hostile to God, for it does not submit to God's law. Indeed, it cannot. Those who are in the flesh cannot please God. Right? So here's the reality, okay? Nobody knows that they are slaves, right? Just as nobody in the Matrix knew that they were slaves, right? And nobody knows even that sin exists. Even just as nobody in the Matrix knew that the machines existed. They just carried on their lives regularly. Okay? So how to get out? Right? How to get out of this bondage, this slavery, right? This prison. Right? Well, firstly, how do people get out of the Matrix? Right? It's one of the things that I find really fascinating about this clip that we watched was when they talked about truth, right? Neo asked what the Matrix was. I just on this earlier, and Morpheus said, it is the world that's been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth. And from the truth, and Neo said, what truth? And he said that you are a slave. And that's the first time when Neo heard that about himself. He never knew that before, right? But that's the first step is really important, because the first step to break free from the slavery was to recognize the existence of that slavery, right? Unless Neo recognized the existence of that slavery, he would be forever stuck. And it's the same with Christianity, right? The first step is to recognize our slavery to sin. To recognize, yes, we rejected His purpose, we become unaware of His purpose for us. So that's the first step. But that's only half the coin. Okay, that's only half the truth. And what's the other half the truth? That's Jesus Christ. Right? The first half is that we've sinned, we're in bondage to slavery. The second half is Jesus Christ. What do we mean by that? Here's Philippians 2, 5-8. This is Paul writing again. Have this mind among yourselves, which is yours in Christ Jesus, who, though He was in the form of God, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied Himself by taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men, and being found in human form, He humbled Himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on the cross. So this word servant, I bolded it and I've highlighted it. And, no, I didn't highlight it. I bolded it and italicized it, right? Because that word servant in the original Greek language, right, and that's the New Testament was written in Greek, right? In the original Greek language is the same word used for slave in John 8. It's doulos, right? It's the same exact word. What does that mean? That means Jesus was a son and we were slaves, and Jesus chose to be a slave so that we could be sons, right? And so that's what John 8 means when he says, if the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed. Right? Martin Luther, he called this the great exchange. It means we have this position, and Jesus had this position, and He chose voluntarily. He didn't have to. He chose voluntarily to switch places with us. Right? It's like you bomb a test, and the nerd across from you got straight A's. He aced it, and he says, you know what? I'm going to write my name on your score, on your test, and I'm going to have you write your name on mine. It's just like that. You know what I mean? It's like we were dead. We talked about this last week. We were dead, and Jesus was alive, and Jesus chose to die so that we could be alive. Right? We were sinners, and Jesus was fully righteous, and Jesus chose to be sin on our behalf so that we could be the righteousness of God. Right? That's the great exchange. You know, I'm going on a little bit rant. I'm going to wrap up in a little bit, but you know, we're called EpicMovement, right? I didn't know this until actually a few weeks ago. But EpicMovement is called EpicMovement not because of the word epic in an adjective sense, like, oh, that's an epic car, what video game, whatever is epic, right? It's not that sense. It's an epic in the sense of, here's dictionary.com, a long narrative poem recounting in elevated style the deeds of a legendary hero, especially one originating in oral folk tradition, right? Like the Iliad or the Odyssey, right? That's an epic, okay? And the epic that we're about isn't the Odyssey or whatever, it's the gospel. And this legendary hero is Jesus, right? And the deeds that He accomplished was He died on the cross, okay? The gospel is the oldest epic, the original epic, the best epic, right? It's what God has been weaving throughout history, finally climaxing with Jesus on the cross. And it's this revolution within this human race, right? Ever since the dawn of time, we've rejected God, we've pushed Him away, we've chose to be slaves to sin, and since then, God has been building up a revolution, right? And you can trace this throughout the Old Testament, but it culminated when Jesus died on the cross. And it's this thing that it goes against the natural order of things, right? And it's for anybody who wants to truly be free, right? There's this, have you read, what's it called, The Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe? C.S. Lewis, right? There's this line where,
Aslan.
Sorry?
The lion's name, the Aslan?
Yeah, Aslan, yeah. There's this line where Aslan, who's like a Christ figure, analogously, whatever, he rises from the dead, right? And then, and then I think it was Lucy, she asks why, and he says, this is when death starts going backwards, right? This is the reversal of everything wrong that's ever happened. And so our epic movement, the movement that we're about, is about latching onto this, right? And so if you want to hop on board, I would really welcome to do so. And just to take the red pill and join the resistance. And so, where are you right now, right? Where are you right now? Maybe you're just checking things out. That's totally okay. For all you know, maybe this whole red pill, blue pill thing, maybe this epic movement thing is just a huge scam. Maybe you're thinking that, right? Maybe it's in the back of your mind. You don't know if there's anything out there, right? You feel like you need to investigate some more. That's totally okay. And if that's you, I want to be really clear. We welcome you here. I mean, every single week, to every single event, and we'll love you just the same. Okay? I want to be clear with that. We're not going to pressure you to do anything you don't want to do. And if you feel like you learn stuff here, or if you feel like you don't learn stuff here, you just like to hang out, that's totally cool too. I want you to know that. Or maybe, this is you, maybe you want to take the red pill. Or maybe you're in the process of taking the red pill. Meaning you feel a little bit like Neo. You have this feeling you can't explain. You have what Morpheus called a splinter in your mind. It's driving you mad. Right? Right? You feel like something is out there. You want to take a risk maybe and go for it. Just see how deep the rabbit hole goes. Right? And if that's you, just talk to me, talk to Tony, talk to Elba, Sushi. Let's talk to somebody and sort it out. Because I wasn't always a Christian, but I can testify that this journey that I've been in, this rabbit hole experience I've been in, is worthwhile. Right? But that's you. I'm just going to end with one quote, and that'll be it, and I'll be done. Okay. And this is Tim Keller. He's a pastor in Manhattan. He says, "Don't come to Christianity because it's relevant, though it certainly is. Don't come to Christianity because it's exciting, though it absolutely is. Don't come to Christianity because it'll meet your needs, though it certainly will. Come because it's true. Otherwise, it's just a placebo effect."